Hi guys, in today's video we're going to be doing a bit of work on a Perodua Kenari, which is the same as a Daihatsu Move. These are a Malaysian built car and these are based on Daihatsu Move engine, bodywork wise, design and everything. Perodua are a name that a lot of people haven't heard of, but they do actually make a few brands of car, largely based on Daihatsus. Now, what we're going to be doing today is replacing the timing belt and tensioner on this 3-cylinder common rail fuel injection engine, and the process will be the same for any Daihatsu Move. The theory of the timing belt replacement remains the same regardless of the engine. If an engine has a timing belt, the theory and the process is the same, but the removal of the ancillaries and access is the thing that differs. So if you're just looking at general tips on changing the timing belt, then this video will be useful to you. If you're looking specifically at replacing timing belts on the Daihatsu 3-cylinder engine, then this will be very useful to you, hopefully. So we've got the car here, we've got a bunch of tools, we've got the new timing belt and tensioner ready, so we're going to dive straight in and see what we need to remove to get to the timing belt. So we're over at the right hand side of the car. This is the right or offside wing, as it would be referred to in the UK or any left hand drive country, and here we see the top of the engine. Now the first things we need to remove to get to the timing belt cover are this intake tube from the airbox here, which twists off from the end and lifts away from a little rubber mounting just under there, and then we'll need to remove the 2 pulleys that operate from the crankshaft to the water pump and the water pump to the alternator and power steering pump. So we're going to go ahead and remove these, and then I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we're just back briefly for a couple of points down in the depths of the engine bay. Apologies for the poor light in here, I'm kind of doing the best I can with what I have. But you'll see down there the main crankshaft pulley bolts. This one up above it with the 4 bolts, this pulley comes off relatively easily because these are low torque. So a good fitting socket, and in this case a 1/4-inch wrench and a good sharp jerk anti-clockwise, and that's loosened those bolts off no problem. The crankshaft bolt, using an old crude method, you can see there's a socket sitting on it which is connected to an extension bar and a breaker bar there. It's a very, very crude method, but it does work if you don't have access to impact tools. Basically, you place that on there, the socket bar, ideally if you can just use a socket and a breaker bar, but in this case the access doesn't allow that because of the chassis member underneath there. So your extension bar if applicable, and then your breaker bar, wedge that against something solid, and then just give the car a very, very quick crank over until you hear it start to spin, and then stop the engine straight away. And then what that does is it breaks the seal that's basically formed on that crankshaft bolt over time from being very, very tight initially and just kind of sticking in there. So a useful little tip for you there. There are YouTube videos showing how to do that, so I didn't actually film the process of doing that because I did try to get it off manually first of all. Right, so over here we've got the 2 pulleys, the 4 bolts that hold the top pulley on there, and what you need to do is give these an inspection while they're off, just make sure they're okay. Bit of a clean up if need be, that'll have a wipe out at the back, but it's okay. There's no nicks and scratches and anything nasty on it. Likewise with the crankshaft pulley, this just pulls straight off and you can see the keyed portion. If I get my hand out of the way, you can see the keyed portion there where it fits onto the woodruff key on the crankshaft, and again a bit of a clean up where necessary. There's a bit of corrosion in the V groove, but I'm not bothered about that because that's not used on this car. That would obviously be used for air conditioning, I suspect. And while you're at it, have a check of the belts. You can see there, of course, they've got the Daihatsu logo on, also Mitsubishi on this one, and likewise on this one they're marked Daihatsu. Gates, which I believe is a major contributor to the automotive industry with regards to rubber belts. They're both in quite decent condition, so they'll be reused. And then over here, back in the engine bay, we've got to the stage now where we can actually start looking at taking the timing cover off. So we've got several, I think they're either 10 or 11 mil bolts, I think, but there's about 6 of those that hold the cover on all the way down, and we need to undo those. I've unclipped this, there's 2 clips that hold this in place. Unclip this and then need to unplug this wire down here, and then the timing cover will just slip off, revealing the timing belt. Down here we're now looking into the engine bay, and we've got the timing belt, camshaft pulley and crankshaft pulley down at the bottom. Let me just swivel this round and hopefully I can see where I'm pointing and show you. We've got the crankshaft pulley right down here. This is tricky to get my hand in without try and keep some light on the subject. Crankshaft pulley down here, where I'm pointing right here. The tensioner right there. It's going to be tricky to see, I know, I apologise for the lighting. And then the camshaft pulley is this one up here. Next step we need to do is to rotate these so we've got the timing marks in alignment. I can then mark the belt and then check that against the new belt. First of all, a couple of things to mention. You'll see here this is the dipstick tube. Now one of the bolts that holds the camshaft, the timing belt cover on, goes through this and holds it in place, and you'll need to actually wiggle this out of the way as you take the cover off. So bear that in mind. And then the other thing to mention, I'm just going to quickly pop you over here, and we've got the, let me zoom out a moment so you can see where we're at. That's the timing belt cover as it comes off the engine. You'll need to check the inside of this, give it a clean, because there'll be bits of dust and what have you from there. And then you'll notice there, sorry about the lighting, but I've got it set for the engine bay. Now these are the bolts, and from the timing cover you'll notice they're all different lengths, so they're laid out in order. The 2 bottom ones, 2 middle ones, then the upper ones, and then the very top one, laid out in order to make sure that they go back in exactly the same place. So I'm going to clip you back on here, and zoom you back down so we can see what's going on. And then the next step is to pop the crankshaft pulley bolt back in place temporarily and turn this engine until we get both pulleys on the appropriate timing marks. I'm going to pop the spark plugs out, so I'm going to take the cover off, pop the spark plugs out. That will make this easier to rotate because we're getting rid of the compression, which of course is a byproduct of having the spark plugs in there creating the compression. So I'll be back in a moment with that. We've got the spark plugs out. See the top of the engine over there, the spark plug, empty spark plug holes. We've got individual coil packs bolted in, and then a cover that neatens that up, so they're removed, which will make turning of the engine easier to align the timing marks. And now the next step is to turn the engine over and align up the timing marks. Change this for a ratchet so I can actually do this while I'm up here looking at what I'm doing. Alright. Now you can't see it just yet, but there's a little dot up on the top tooth of here which aligns with the timing mark. I'm going to have to be delving down in here to have a look in this and make sure everything's lined up, so I'll be back with you in a minute and hopefully show you those marks a bit more clearly. Okay guys, we're back in showing the, hopefully it says, showing the timing marks. Now you can see there where there's a bit of masking tape stuck to the top of the actual belt. That's pointing to a little dot on the pulley, which points to a little dot here, which is not very obvious, but it is there. so hopefully you can see that. And then the other one, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see this from down here, if I can light it up. We have at the bottom right hand side, this is tricky, trying to get the camera in here and the light in here for you. Hopefully you can just see that. There's a little dot on the toothed pulley at the bottom right hand side there, and you can see, hopefully, problem is this is a small hole, and I need both of these to occupy the same space, the camera and the light source. Yeah, there we go. Hopefully you can see there's a little protrusion in the alloy casting, bang opposite that little dot in the pulley. Now, when both of those are lined up, we're on top dead centre cylinder number 1. So next thing we need to do is slacken off the tensioner, which is down there, and pop the old belt off, making sure not to disturb the timing marks at all. Now ideally what I would do here is put a little bit of Tipex or something on the old belt so I can compare it to the new one. I don't have any Tipex, I forgot to bring that with me, annoyingly. So what I'm having to do is use a little bit of masking tape, which hopefully I'll be able to get on the bottom bit, and then I can compare that to the new belt just to make sure the belts are the same. So we're going to do a check of the old belt, compare it to the new belt and make sure that they are the same. Okay, so we'll be back in a moment with that. So this is where we're at. I've had a little bit of a break while I was waiting for the camcorder battery to charge, because unfortunately this camcorder battery is not the best in the world. I did have a couple of spares, but they flaked out on me a while ago, so I kind of have to work between charging things up. But anyway, this is where we're at now. We've got the old timing belt off. And if I can get right down here, you can see that dot on top of the timing belt pulley a bit more clearly. This is hopefully. Well, you can see the reflection, that's where the dot is, because it's obviously a bit out of focus, and that marries up with this barely visible noggin up here where my thumb is. So what I've been doing is giving all this housing down here a bit of a wipe out. It's generally dry, a little bit dusty in places, but no sort of greasy oily residue or anything, which is good. So give that a check, give it a wipe out and what have you. The tensioner has been removed, and we're going to just pop over here, and here we've got the old belt, which I actually found some paint, and I managed to mark with a little spot of paint on both the top and bottom pulleys respectively, so that makes it easier to compare to the new belt. That's the timing tensioner tool, which I will look at in a moment, and here is the old tensioner pulley. It doesn't look bad, however, if I can balance this somewhere on my knee, for example, there, and whoop, now I don't know if you can hear that. It's not bad. It's not horrendous, and it would probably last for a good few thousand miles, but it's certainly drying up. You can hear that. Now I'll just give you a comparison against the new timing belt tensioner, which is here. Looks exactly the same. You can tell that that's nicely packed with grease. It's a sealed bearing inside there, and no noise, no play, nothing. So you know that that's going to be good for a few thousand miles, a good few thousand miles. So a little bit of play, just ever so slightly, and as I say, you may not be able to hear that on here, but there is a very slight rattle. It's not a horrible noise, it's not slopping about, so you could get away with using this for a little while longer, but it's certainly sounding like the lubrication inside there has dried up a bit. So we've got the new belt over there, the new tensioner over there, and it's a blueprint kit, nicely packaged. And as I say, the old one here, I've compared the belt, I've done a teeth count and compared the sizes, and they're good. They match, which is good, and then the cover is going to need a bit of a wipe out internally before that goes on. But that will be done after the belt has been replaced. So this is where we're at just now. And the next step is going to be taking the new belt, making a couple of marks on that belt to make sure that they correspond with the indents in the top and bottom pulley. This is something that's not strictly necessary, but it's something I find very useful to do. If you look back at my 9/16 timing belt videos, you'll see that I do that there. And if you put a little mark, Tipex is perfect really, but I forgot to bring my little bottle of Tipex, so which is a bit of a nuisance. But if you put a little mark where both or all three or all four or whatever, depending on whether you've got a twin cam or, you know, all this kind of gubbins. However many number of pulleys you've got to line up with a mark, make sure you've got the corresponding mark, just a little dot on your belt, and then you know everything's lined up just right as per your old one. And it just saves a bit of faffing around if you're a tooth out here or there. So next step is going to be to put a mark on the belt and install the new belt and then the new tensioner, and then we'll be using the tensioning tool that you saw there to tighten that up. Now I'm not going to go into massive detail with the tensioning tool purely because I'm going to do a separate video on that, because this one's probably going to end up being relatively long by the time I've edited it. So rather than have you wait until halfway through the video just on a how to use the tensioning tool, I'm going to do a separate video which is just specifically going to be a how-to on using the tensioning tool and how it works and what you do with it. It's a universal tensioning tool available from Laser, and that one was from eBay, Satra brand, but they're all much of a muchness, but I'll explain that in the other video anyway. So there we go. So the next step is get the new belt ready. The old belt doesn't look too bad, but again I'll show you that in more detail when I do the tensioning tool video, because I'll be using that to demonstrate them. In the meantime, I'll be getting this one fitted in the tensioner and then showing you the tensioning tool in use on here. Okay guys, so we've got the new timing belt on. Unfortunately, sorry I couldn't show you the actual fitting of that because it's kind of cramped in here, and to try and get a camera in as well as my hands sort of wriggling everything on, it's a bit tricky. What I've done, because I'm not a big fan of marking up new timing belts with anything that might actually harm the rubber on them, so things like dots of paint and what have you, you don't know what chemical composition they are. I don't like things like that. Tipex likewise, even though it's relatively safe, scrapes off quite easily and dries quickly, I don't know what kind of solvents they use in there. So for old belts and such I don't mind. For new belts I would typically put something like a choke mark, or where possible use the marks on the belt. Now this one only has marks on one point of the belt, so what I've done is I've put a little piece of masking tape, as I did originally, which is what I was going to do originally with the old belt to mark it, but I wasn't able to get one on the bottom. And then on the bottom, this is going to be very, very hard to see, but hopefully the explanation will make clear what I've done here. Somewhere down the bottom, I'm going to try and wiggle my camera down here so that you can see this. And I have lined it up in such a way that the marks on the timing belt, the actual print on the timing belt rather, you can just see it on the edge there. This lines up with 2 teeth above the dot on the timing pulley. The reason it was 2 teeth above is because I wouldn't have been able to see it if it was actually on the dot. So you can just see the white writing there, and that's 2 teeth above the dot, which shows me that this is now lined up correctly. And on the long side, which is the important one, and then it's fed around and then around the tensioner, which is up there. At this point here, I've tightened the tensioner up just a little bit, enough to make sure it holds everything in place, and I'm going to run through a few rotations. Now, bear in mind, for those that don't know, because this is one of those things that a lot of people don't realise until the first time they mess about with crankshafts and camshafts and such. For every full 360-degree rotation of the crankshaft, you get a 180-degree rotation of the camshaft. Because it's a 4-stroke engine, the valves have to be open on one of the upstrokes and closed on the other upstroke. So the compression one, they have to be closed to compress the air-fuel mixture. The exhaust one, the exhaust valve has to be open to expel the exhaust gases. So because of that, your crankshaft and camshaft operate one turn of your camshaft to 2 turns of your crankshaft. So your crankshaft will have to turn fully over twice for your camshaft to turn over once. So when you manually wind these through, as you should always do before you put a new belt on, tension it and start the car, when you manually wind these through using the crank pulley bolt, you should always turn it at least twice. In this case, I'm going to run it through several rotations just to make sure, because I want to be absolutely certain that this belt is lined up correctly, and then that way if anything happens and I happen to get contact manually, I'm less likely to do any damage and I can realign everything. I'll try that again without throwing the torch around. And what this does also is it helps the belt to centre itself on the pulley. There you see the writing that I was referring to, and the bit that you could see lined up on the tooth was this bit up here. So some belts, or quite a lot of timing belts, have several bits of writing all over them, which is handy. Something I meant to mention, always check as well before you fit a timing belt to see if it has an arrow denoting direction of rotation. Some do, some don't. If they don't, I tend to put it with the writing facing towards you, like you saw there. If they do, then make sure it goes with the direction of rotation of the engine. So that's one full turn of the crankshaft. That means we turned the camshaft fully twice. I'm just going to go through that a few more times for my own peace of mind and just make sure that that's doing what it needs to be doing, and it's opening and closing the valves, and everything's still lined up after a few turns. So that's 2. Don't worry about that tapping noise you're hearing there, that's just my ratchet knocking on the edges of that hole that's through the inner wing. So I'm just going to pause it there a second just to show you what I mean. So the writing, as it's facing you, you can read that it's the right way up, and that's what I mean if it doesn't have a direction of rotation arrow. So far, I'm quite happy with this. No horrible noises, everything's turning as it should. So, that's good. So I'm just going to line up these marks once more, like so. And I'm going to line up the marks according to the belt, incidentally, because obviously as it rotates, being an odd number of teeth, it does move out away from the timing marks. So bring that round to that point up. Whoops, I'm too far, we'll have to go around there again. Always make sure you turn clockwise, incidentally, never anti-clockwise. So, or the direction of rotation of the engine, more specifically. Do bear in mind that some engines actually run the opposite way, so just going to line that up there like so, and then have a quick visual check and make sure that the timing belt is still in the same position down here, and it's still reflecting the correct position as it is, which is good. That's 2 teeth up and it's in the same position. So everything looks good there, it's had a few rotations. So what we need to do now is get the timing tool and zoom down here a little bit, and then hopefully you'll be able to see the tensioning tool in operation. So, spin this round so I can see what I'm doing. First thing to do is slacken this off completely. And you see we've got a plunger, hopefully you can see this, got a plunger there with a scale, spring loaded, so I can get this to focus, there we go, plunger there with a gauge on the side, and then a micrometer adjustment here. Right, this bit's going to be a little bit tricky to film, but hopefully you'll get enough of an idea to see how it's used in operation. Now you can see this is attached to the timing belt, halfway down the longest run on this side opposite the tensioner. You can see the micrometer adjustment there. That's actually set, you'll not be able to tell, but that's set to 17.2 on the scale. You can just see the white marks. The little dot just above, in between the 1 and the 2, the large one and the 2 there that's reflecting, is the pointer which shows the tension. That's the spring loaded section, and that's the bit that adjusts once you've got the tool set correctly. This is currently pointing to about 12 and needs to be at about 11.5, so we're somewhere sort of near where we want to be. I'm going to give that a little bit of a tweak just to get that right, that I'm happy with, and then we'll tighten up the tensioner to the specified torque settings and start reassembling. Okay, so we're here at the completion of the job. It's been tricky to kind of show bits and pieces, but I've tried to show things as best I can throughout. The new timing belt's on, the pulleys are back on and torqued up to specification. The only exception being the bottom one. It needs tightening up to 98 Newton meters, which is about 78 foot-pounds, 75 foot-pounds or thereabouts. I managed to get it to click about 65 or so, definitely, and I think I maybe did about 70 odd, but when you're doing this single-handedly, it's very, very hard to do. Ideally, the easiest way to do this is to get to put it in gear and get a friend to stand on the brakes while you actually torque it up, which is easier said than done when you don't have a great deal of access and leverage. So I'm going to have to get that double checked. I'll pop this here like so, and now for the exciting bit. I'm going to turn the key and it should be okay. There we go, cracking stuff. We've got ticking over and sounding very nice, exactly as it should. The only other thing I need to address is I noticed when I took out the spark plugs to make the turning of the engine easier that it's got 2 of the correct type spark plugs and an incorrect one in, oddly enough. Not only is it an incorrect, it's a long reach plug, so it's a minor miracle that that's actually not too long a reach to contact the piston, which thankfully it isn't. I mean, obviously I've been running around in this thing for a while now, so I would have been aware of that sooner if so. So I need to replace that particular one, but that's us all done. So I hope this has been useful for any Perodua or Daihatsu users, and likewise I hope the general procedure of this has been useful for anybody looking at doing the timing belt job themselves. I will be putting another video up, as explained, in greater detail showing the timing belt tensioning tool and how that works. So keep an eye out for that one. And for anybody that's got one or thinking of getting one of those tools, and I'll give you a demonstration of how that all works. So thanks for watching.